Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerner's Northern Garden Game of Thrones edition. So winter is coming, it is quickly approaching. Tonight we are estimated to get lows of 31 degrees, which means I am in dire straits to get my houseplants inside. So I wanted to go over what I do to prepare those to come in. Now, I am not opposed to using inorganic methods to control pests in my houseplants that have been outdoors all season. I will use a 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 houseplant insecticide, which I will link below and put a picture on the screen of that. But primarily for all of my treatment for all the plants, I use this, which is great for fungus gnats. I have found I struggle significantly with fungus gnats during the winter. I have tried changing the soil, using cinnamon, watering less. My plants will basically thirst to death, as I like to say, and I still end up having a watering fungus gnat problem when I start seeds in January. So these are an organic method. It is essentially crushed corn, and it has BT on it, Bacillus thuringiensis, which is an effective organic means of controlling fungus gnats. Now, additionally, I will drench with neem oil. This is a cold pressed neem oil that I've used for years. This bottle has actually lasted me a really long time, and I will use a few tablespoons per gallon of water mixed with some just Blue Dawn dish detergent. You can use a different variety if you want, preferably something that doesn't have any scents to it, and I just use a regular Blue Dawn. So everything gets this treatment organic wise. Everything that is not edible will get also 𝗟𝗸𝗲 treatment, which is the houseplant insecticide that I mentioned below. I don't play around with bugs in the house. Fungus gnats are extremely aggravating, and that's just something I'm not willing to deal with. So I have a bay tree, a bay leaf plant that is right behind the camera that will only get the organic methods of this and the neem oil, and that's it. Everything else will get that houseplant insecticide. So I have the ficus behind me and a couple other things that need to go in. So because I've been doing this for years, I don't really have a particular measurement that I use. I just initially start with a little Dawn. This is a 2-gallon watering can, so I just put a little bit of soap in there. Of course, you don't want suds coming out of your container if you don't have to. It's just enough to break the tension on the neem oil, which if you don't have a surfactant in there, it will separate with the water. So that's very important. This neem oil I have does get a little solid if it's not a good temperature. So sometimes I will use warmer water to do this. So you can see it's pretty solid in there. I might have to take it inside. Let me go warm this up and I will be right back. This thing's been in my basement since seed starting season. That's why it was a little congealed. You can run it under warm water around the bottle, and that's typically how I get it out. And I just gonna pull a few tablespoons in here. I may have to add a little more hot water to get the rest to come out around the sides. But for now, that's it. And I'm gonna fill up my container. And I just want to make sure the plants are drenched. All right, you can see a little suds in here, that's perfect. And what I'm going to do with these plants, because normally I would have done this weeks ago, I just hadn't got around to it, and that's typically how I operate. I am going to put these immediately after this water drains out in the garage, since it is going to get so cold tonight. And they will probably stay in the garage without light for a week, which is perfectly fine. So these items will sit in my garage for about a week. As I said, typically I will just transition them directly inside, but I've worn out my time that I have available left this year for plants to stay outside, particularly since we have a potential freeze tonight. As you know, houseplants are all typically tropical, and you don't want to leave those outside. The bay leaf tree specifically that I just showed you watering, that can survive in higher zones. I really wanted one to have for fresh cooking, so it's kind of become a houseplant for me. I keep it trimmed down pretty small, but it will survive in other zones, and I just think it's a really nice indoor houseplant in winter. I had some issues with pest over winter, but I had been keeping it in my basement, and I don't think it received enough light even from my grow light. So this year I'm going to experiment and put it on our west-facing windows here, and hopefully it'll get a little more sunlight in winter and be more happy, and I can give it a little more care than I typically do when it's just sitting in my basement. So that's all I'm doing to these plants right now. I will find my houseplant insecticide and put that on there probably tomorrow after I dig it up. It's hiding in the garage somewhere and I need to go find it. But while we're waiting for this to drain, I want to take you around and show you what I got done this weekend. We're losing light fast, so we'll make it quick. I just want to mention that if you want to do an organic drench of something in addition to the neem oil, I have done pyrethrin. Pyrethrin is the organic version of permethrin. Pyrethrin comes from chrysanthemum flower, and permethrin is the scientific created version of that, basically. So I have done a pyrethrin drench on my houseplants before, and that's something you can consider. I would recommend you look online and just see what the mixing ratios are there, because you don't want to damage the roots of your plants with something like that, and you potentially could. So just be very careful if you're doing that. But let's take a look around the garden right quick. So tonight I'm also going to be bringing in my plants I haven't got planted yet. So we still have the plants down here. I haven't got a whole lot done this weekend other than Saturday, simply because it had rained all day Sunday and rained all day yesterday, and I just haven't had a chance to come out here and get anything else in the ground. So I'm going to bring that stuff in just so that it is protected from the freeze, because I don't want it exposed that small quite yet. The temperatures are going to get a little higher the next couple days, or at least it's not going to freeze. And so after tomorrow I will bring it back out and get that stuff healed into the garden or planted where I need it to go in the garden. So we got the mulch down the fence line here. Not much changed in this area, except I had a happy little rabbit or squirrel or something eat nearly all the leaves off my echinacea. I'm not terribly concerned about them since they're perennials, and they would be going to sleep here soon anyway, so that's just something I had to deal with. I noticed they had a snack nearly on every one of them that I planted, so we'll see if those return in the spring. I think they will be perfectly fine. They're pretty hardy. Continuing down this way, it's essentially the same thing. Not a whole lot's changed. We just got the mulch all the way around the perimeter of the garden. It does look so much better. You can see here how it goes out and covers the landscaping fabric that I had here. I haven't got anything else planted back here, although the Atlas roses I just wanted to show one more time because they are just putting on a ton of buds still. So I really love this rose. If you have the opportunity to find one and purchase it and like this color, they do perform pretty well if they like their conditions. As I mentioned, I had this one out front in another flower bed, and it never performed for the past 2 years, and I moved it about a month ago, and it has just put on a ton of growth since that time, and it's just putting on flower buds, even blooming this close to November. I still need to bring in a little bit of mulch, and I'm just going to get bag mulch to cover. These are the bare root Polka Dot phlox that I planted, and you can see they've started to come up. I just want to give them a little more protection over winter and just clean up this look so the clay soil is not sitting directly on top of the mulch. I did get the green giant arborvitae moved. It's this one right here. I think I mentioned that in my last video. I can't remember. Everything's running together this close to the end of the season. I have not sprayed my wilt stop yet. I didn't get to it because it rained essentially all weekend except Saturday, and we mulched all day. We moved 7 yards of mulch, and that was just something I was not able to get to quite yet. In addition to that, I did not get planted that one Japanese maple that I was going to put right here. It's still in its container, so I will also be bringing that in tonight into the garage just to keep it out of this cold air. This is the area that's really transformed. You can see the mulch even behind the fence. I did mulch these perennials that I moved really thickly. This is the 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 hibiscus, so I'm hoping they do well. And then I'm going to dream about what I'm going to put down the rest of this garden space this winter. I think I want something that grows up and looks pretty nice. I actually, during my lunch break, as us gardeners do during our lunch break, got to a garden center and found this lavender twist redbud. I have 2 other redbuds in my garden. You know I love redbuds, and I think this will be a really nice statement piece for the beginning of this pathway to the arbor. So the lavender twist is an older variety of contorted redbud. It does get beautiful purple flowers, pink flowers in spring all along its stems, and it is a native tree, which is a benefit, which means it's going to survive really well here. The red buds that I have planted and seen. We have them crop up everywhere. It's a really big tree around Ohio in general, and in the Midwest, they just perform really well. So I think that will be really good and a nice statement piece entering this pathway here. So I did get all of this mulched. I have left the metal edging here till spring. There's a lot of unfinished things that are going to be just happening with the garden this time of year, just because I ran out of time. But as my friend Jess from Roots and Refuge mentioned, she was like, Matthew, what are you going to do next year? You've accomplished so much this year. I'm like, yeah, I think next year may be a wait and see year, but it's definitely going to be add the finishing touches year. There's just a lot of things that I didn't get to where I wanted this year because I just simply ran out of time. But I'm glad time is running out because, as I mentioned, I'm pretty tired. I did get the vegetable garden cleaned up. You can see I did rip out all of my tomatoes and peppers. What you see left in here is different plants. I do have some hollyhocks here that I planted from seed and grew from seed that I didn't have anywhere to put in the garden this year. I couldn't find a spot. I have some echinacea that I grew from seed in here that's hiding. This stuff is all gonna stay in here over winter. And then in the spring, I will dig that up and find a spot in the garden, I believe. We will see exactly if I do plant these out in the garden. Although they are beautiful, it looks like they had a serious sickness, disease issue. And so if they're gonna be disease type plants, I'm not gonna place those in my garden. But everything that's left is mostly perennial. I have some toothache plants that I planted years ago that are not supposed to survive in our zone, but they've come back every year. And I don't know if that's from self-seeding or what, but these are the little plants you can chew on the buds and they make your mouth and tongue and throat numb. It's really interesting. You should try those out if you've never had them. The honeysuckle looks completely awful, but it has lived to tell its tale another day, at least for another season. I will probably end up removing that in the spring, or if I have some time later in the fall, in the next couple weeks, I may go ahead and remove it then. It is just, as you can see, this time of year, I know it's not the best time of year for plants, but it's looked this way for about a month, and it's just kind of unsightly, and it's an insect attractor for bad insects, particularly aphids, and it has to be treated, which I'm not fond of doing anyway, especially that close to my vegetable garden. And it being this close to my vegetable garden, I'm afraid it's going to attract pests to my vegetable garden. So although the temperature is going to drop quite a lot tonight, I'm leaving my fountains running simply because I do not want them to freeze overnight. And they, as low as the temperature is going to drop, it's only going to be there for a couple hours, and if the water's moving, that shouldn't be a problem. I will actually probably add some more water to the fountains before I close it up for the night, but those will also be turned off here in the next several days to give them time to dry out so I can cover them for winter. It's not my favorite thing to do, is to cover a fountain in winter, but I do want those to last a long time, and here in Ohio, when we can have pretty bad winters, you could risk them cracking if you don't dry them out sufficiently and get them covered before winter. Hi everyone, Future Matthew here. This is also just a reminder that if you have irrigation timers like I recommended earlier in the season to water anything, you need to make sure those are brought in before freeze. They contain really sensitive valves and electronics, and I am working in the complete dark pretty much. It doesn't appear that way on camera, but quite honestly it is. So I'm going to bring in my favorite hose attachments as well. I've disconnected the hoses from the hose bibs on the side of the house. And to, in general, bring in your hoses. I'm going to be leaving my hoses out tonight simply because it's only going to get freezing for maybe an hour in the morning and they will be okay. But I love my water hoses. They're a brand called 𝗟𝗋𝗄, which I have links in all my videos below. And they are the most amazing water hoses you can find out there. And I don't want anything to happen to those because they were quite an investment, but I wouldn't trade them for anything. So even though the temperatures are dropping significantly and we may not get back out of the high 50s, low 60s again this season, I still have a few things that I need to wrap up and plant. I've got to plant that red bud. I am bringing that indoors tonight just because I don't want it exposed to the cold, even though it's been outside at the garden center, acclimated to the temperatures. I want to give it a night to rest in the garage and not be immediately frozen its first night at the house. So this is typically not the time you would want to be planting stuff, just because it's so close to our first frost, which might happen tonight. But I have discovered that if you water something in pretty well, you can be, there's always a chance of losing the plant, but you can be a little more brazen, let's say, at planting stuff this late in the garden. As I mentioned, the hydrangea standards I have on either side of the patio were actually planted in January a couple years ago, so when we had a warm day. So it's definitely doable. Just be cognizant of your weather, and if you spent a lot of money on a plant, maybe just consider healing that in or keeping it a little more protected over winter and not planting it in the ground if you can give it enough moisture. But our winters here in Ohio are pretty wet, so I think it will have plenty of time to root in and get its bearings for spring. That is going to wrap it up for today, guys. I've got to get these plants inside in the garage. We're losing light extremely fast, and the days are just not long enough to get enough done in the garden like I want. The windows are being installed Thursday or Friday, so that's another thing we got to deal with this week. I'm still hoping to do a garden tour. The garden may not look great because of the freeze that's coming, but I'm hoping I can get some good footage right as the garden is going to sleep. So thank you guys for joining me today. So make sure to get your houseplants in if you haven't already. Get them treated organically or inorganically, whatever method you favor and what works best for you. I hope you guys have a nice day, and remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone. Bye.